Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about APA formatting and style. This is going to be quite a long video, so make sure you're comfortable and get a cup of coffee or tea. It's not the most exciting topic, but it is important for any academic text you have to hand in a college or university course that requires some sort of formatting. APA is not the only formatting style that's used in academics, but for most of the courses at Cambrian College, this is the style that we would be using. Another style that you may have used before is MLA. That's used more in science programs, but for our purposes, we're learning APA. All right. I will be posting quite a few other resources that come from the same Purdue OWL source, and it includes some sample templates of cover pages, reference pages, and explaining the different types of font and sizes used in each one. So you don't have to listen to this presentation several times. You can just refer to the documents instead going forward. Okay. So what is APA? For those of you who are unfamiliar with that term, it stands for the American Psychological Association, and basically universities in North America just kind of agreed that this is a nice uniform style in a way that we can present uniform information. So regardless of what school is publishing the information, it all looks fairly uniform and similar. So APA is not just talking about size 12 font and 1-inch margins. It's a little bit more in depth than that. We're looking at the stylistics, the in-text citations, where you see the author's name and year of publication in brackets in the middle of a sentence or towards the end of a sentence, and also references. So anytime someone reads a book or article or any sort of text that someone else wrote and mentions it in their own writing, they have to say where it came from. So we'll talk today about how to format that. All right, so when we look at this, one of the things that comes up is that in APA, we would use first person pronouns rather than third person pronouns. If you are the person who conducted the experiment, it's okay to say we conducted the experiment. If you are not part of the original team of authors, then obviously don't use that pronoun. But in a lot of classes, you may have been told to not use personal pronouns like I in academic writing. But if you are the researcher, it's totally okay. Also, it's important to use active voice when you're stressing the actions of the research. So this is a grammar concept, active voice and passive voice. Active voice is when you have the sentence structure of subject, verb, object. We asked participants questions. So we're focusing on who did the action instead of who received the action. So we asked participants, instead of saying the participants have been asked questions by the researchers. However, if you decide that you want to stress the attention or focus on the object, then you would be using passive voice. So for example, the tests were inconclusive. This would be preferable to say instead of we found the tests inconclusive, because in that sentence, the focus should be on the tests instead of the people who found them inconclusive. All right. I've been saying throughout the semester that college communications classes or college English courses are quite a bit different from high school English courses. So for those of you who have bad memories of high school English classes being too artistic, or you're thinking about writing poetry or book reports, that sort of thing, APA styled papers are nothing like that. So instead of trying to use flowery artistic language, we would prefer it that you are clear, concise, and plain. So you should be as specific as possible when you are describing things or explaining concepts. Don't feel like you have to use a thesaurus and impress the reader with large vocabulary words. That is the opposite of what we're trying to do, because people from around the world are going to be reading published peer-reviewed articles, and they need to be understood by anyone who's reading them. So that means various dialects of English and people from countries that use a different dialect of English than you should be able to understand what you're saying as long as you are clear and concise enough. Also, journal articles are fairly lengthy on their own. There's no need to make them any longer, so be as concise as possible. So condense the information whenever you can. And simple descriptive adjectives are great, but you want to avoid using figurative language. So for example, phrases like, "Oh, I didn't understand, it went over my head," or "It's raining cats and dogs," or "It's easy as pie," or "It's a piece of cake." You might understand those phrases, but not everyone who uses English does. So figurative language is different in different places around the world. And so again, if you are publishing material and you want it to be read by a wide variety of people, you want to avoid using figurative language that only a certain group of people would understand. Okay, when we are looking at quantitative articles, this is the typical format of how they would be structured. So quantitative research has empirical, numerical information and usually involves a lot of statistics. So peer-reviewed articles will have this general outline of information. It will always start with a title page. You'll have an abstract, which is just a short paragraph kind of outlining what the whole paper is talking about. And it's the abstract is used for readers who are sifting through a library database and trying to decide whether or not they want to invest more time and read the whole thing. So the abstract is quite clear. Introduction, method, results, and discussion. Now, the next type, when we look at qualitative articles, it isn't too much different from the quantitative structure. The difference, you'll notice, is that it says findings and results instead of just results. So again, qualitative articles, qualitative studies, you might not have a conclusive conclusion at the end of it. You may have found something in general, but the issue may not have been solved yet because you're sort of just describing more about human experiences and things that cannot be numerically quantified. But again, overall structure is the same. All right, literature review. We won't be doing this in our courses this semester, but if you were to write one, and this is kind of more along the lines of what we were doing back in high school in English classes, reviewing literature. If you were to have an APA manual, then it might look like this if you're doing a literature review. We won't spend too much time talking about that though because it's not relevant for our semester. Okay. There are so many different types of papers that students end up submitting throughout their time in college or university, and it might not fit into a quantitative or qualitative or literature review format. If that is the case, consult your professor, instructor, teacher, whoever it is that's running the course, because we all have our own preferences. So even though there's this APA format that's supposed to be unifying and uniform, we all have slight adjustments that we have preferences for or against, right? So just double check and make sure that you know how they would prefer it to be structured. And also the online APA publication manual is very helpful. It outlines many different genres of text and how to format them. Typically though, if you're handing in a paper for a college course, it should be, and this is general across the board, regardless of what type of assignment it is, it should be typed. We don't really have handwritten assignments anymore in college, so it should be typed. The font should be double spaced, not triple spaced, not single spaced, but double spaced. And I will post a video showing you how to format all of that as well, based on these basic standards. Also, 1-inch margins. If you're using standard Microsoft Word format, it should automatically give you 1-inch margins. And your font size should either be size 10 or 12. Your teacher might specify that they would prefer size 12. And of course, the size of paper that we are using is 8.5 by 11. Okay. In terms of what goes at the top of each page when you're using APA format, you want to have the page number in the upper right corner of the page. According to the 7th edition of APA format, you no longer need a running header. And so by running header, I am talking about this thing here. Awesome example of APA paper. Yes, that is okay if it is a professional paper. So if you are a paid employee of an institution and you are publishing on behalf of them and you're a professional in your field, yes, you need a header. But APA has decided that for the 7th edition, which just came out in the fall of 2019, that student papers do not require running headers. So one less thing you need to worry about now. If you have a large paper to hand in and it needs to be in APA format, this is the order that it would be presented in. So first you have a title page, then you have the abstract, the main body of the article, and then your references. If it is a smaller assignment, which is sort of what you will be doing for my final project, you don't need a separate abstract page because you aren't conducting your own research study. You're just summarizing something that other people wrote. So again, if you used APA in previous courses, you were using an older version, and so the formatting rules have changed a little bit, and we will talk about the slight changes. And one of those changes that I already mentioned was about the student papers not requiring a header at the top of the page. So most of those differences, again, are focusing on the title page and running header, but a few more include, here we go. On your title page, again, no more running header. And when you list all of this other information below, you'll notice that none of the font is larger. All of the font is the same size. It is double spaced, and you are including just this information. So you have the names of the people who wrote it, the school that it is for, the course code and course name, the teacher or professor's name, and then the date that it's handed in, not the date that it's due. I've noticed this sometimes when students hand in assignments late, they put the original due date. Please put the date that you're actually submitting it on. Here we go. Next one. Again, this is for professional paper, so that's why there is a header at the top of the page. So I'm just going to skip past this one because this doesn't apply to us. Okay, an abstract page. If you were writing an abstract, then this is what it looks like. It's a 150 to 250 word summary, and it shouldn't really be more than a page. But again, we're not going to spend too much time on this one today because you aren't writing an abstract. In terms of the main body, so the actual essay or the summary that you're writing, the page number still needs to be in the top corner. The title of your paper should be at the top and center, and the font should be bold. So you have regular font throughout the whole page except for the title. Even though you have the title on the cover page, you're going to repeat it above your first paragraph. Then your text should be double spaced with all sections following each other without a break. All right. I've mentioned before that you should indent the first line of each paragraph. Indenting the paragraph helps the reader see where your paragraphs begin and end. So there's no need to add extra spaces between those lines. To be honest, it kind of just looks to your teachers like you didn't want to write the full word count, and so you're trying to fill the space with empty lines. So just don't put empty spaces. You only need to indent the first line of each paragraph. Then you need to identify the sources that you're using in your paper. And it says either narrative citations or parenthetical in-text citations. I will explain shortly what that means. Those are large words. Don't worry about it. It just means either with the brackets or within the sentence itself. Then formatting tables and figures. We won't need to worry about that this semester, but when you include graphs, maps, anything like that, they do need to be formatted appropriately to APA style. Okay. Then, at the very end of your assignment, you have a reference page. And this is roughly what it would look like, aside from the fact that obviously this is not a student paper because there's a running header at the top of the page. So here you have references, centered. It does not need to be bolded this time. So it was bolded above the essay, or above the summary, but not on your reference page. See what I mean? So many little details of rules. It's impossible to remember them all, so don't feel like you have to. I'd encourage you to revisit this video or the PowerPoint. You can click through it yourself instead of listening to this whole thing again. Or again, just refer to the documents that I have posted. So yes, references. If you would prefer, you could call it works cited. That's another option, but I would advise against using the title bibliography, because bibliography just means here's a list of books and things that I read. Whereas that's not what we're doing. In our course, when you are using a source, you are taking information from it and summarizing it or directly quoting it in your own writing. So that isn't just here's a list of things I read. It's here's a list of things that I read and took information from. So that's why we want to call it either references or works cited, because you are citing information from other works. You'll also notice that the reference page is double spaced, just like the main body of the text should be. And over here, you'll see that the last name of each author hangs over the edge a little bit, and that all of these names are in alphabetical order. So this is a formatting issue, and it takes a bit of time to adjust it. And I will again show you how to do that in another screencast video of reformatting things in Microsoft Word. But this is something that we won't need to worry about until mid-April in terms of formatting the final copy. But yes, it's helpful when you see the last names like this, because alphabetical order, it's sort of jumping off the page at you. Whereas you can imagine if you didn't have this hanging indent, it would take a little bit longer to locate the names of the authors. All right. When you are using the author's names in the text, in the brackets, you're just putting the author's last name. But on the reference page itself, now you're going to include the author's first name initials. So we're going to stay with having the author's last name first, Smith, but then we have a comma, and then let's say, for example, this person's name is John, right? John, and then they have a middle name that starts with Q. I'm not sure what exactly that could be, but yes, this is how it would be formatted. So we really don't care about the author's first name. We just refer to them by their last name. If you are unsure of whether it's the first name or the last name when you're reading a name on the source, send me an email, ask me, and I can help you figure that out. Yes, when you are using titles, then we have some rules for capitalization. So capitalize only the first letter of the first word of a title and the subtitle, the first word after a colon or a dash in the title, and proper nouns. So by proper nouns, names of people, names of places, languages, that sort of thing. Do not capitalize the first letter of the second word in a hyphenated compound word. Here are some examples here. The T has a capital because it's the first word. And then after the colon, we have capital H. Then we have Purdue Owl. This is capital because it's a proper noun. It's the name of a place or organization. But then notice that the rest of these words, Saved My Essay and Perfectly Formatted Paper, none of these words have capital letters based on these rules here. When you are including a journal title, all of the major words should be capitalized. You might be wondering, what does that mean? What are major words? We are talking about nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. So we look below here, Journal of Economic and Management Perspectives. We have capital for journal, economic, management, and perspectives, but not for of, because that is not a noun, verb, adjective, or adverb. It's not one of those major words. Then, italicize titles of longer works, such as books and journals. So if you were citing a source and it was, say, a chapter in a book, then you're going to give us the name of the chapter and the name of the book, but when you give us the title of the book, it will be in italics. Same goes for journal articles. So we have the title of the article that they wrote, Relationship Knowledge and Attitude About Fast Food with Obesity on Teenagers. That's the title of the article, and the title of the journal, the larger text that it comes from, is in italics. Do not italicize, underline, or put quotes around the titles. We notice how there are no quotation marks in here. All right. APA format does not include quotation marks. And yes, these little details are important. They do matter. So within this reference here, you see a lot of extra punctuation. We have the points after the R and then a comma. Both of those pieces of punctuation are necessary to show that this is someone's initial, and then a comma to say, hey, there's another author coming after the first one. So this is what it would look like if there were 3 authors. All right. When it comes time to put together your reference list, it's a bit of an overwhelming thing, and that's why we keep stressing, make sure you don't try to leave this assignment to the very last minute, because it's a bit overwhelming. It's a complex system of citation. So we use some strategies when we're formatting this. First of all, what sort of source are you using? Are you using a book, a magazine, newspaper article, a journal, a web page, a YouTube video, a tweet? What are you using? Because that will determine how you format your reference list. Yes, they look different. So even if it's the same person who wrote a book, a journal article, a magazine article, a newspaper article, and tweeted something on Twitter, the format of that will look different depending on the type of source. Okay, so you can find a sample citation from this link here, and it kind of outlines the different types. And then you simply mirror the sample. So you can tell, it's kind of obvious when someone's name is listed and then the title of a chapter or article, the title of a book or journal, that sort of thing. So you sort of just mirror the sample. Keep the punctuation the way that you find it. And if it's italics in the journal title, then make sure that your journal title also is in italics. And that's sort of the easy way to go about it. Mirror the sample, all right? Make sure that the entries are listed in alphabetical order. I will show you how to get Microsoft Word to do all of this for you, so you don't even need to think about it, but you still need to sort of spell check, edit, proofread it, because don't just trust that the computer is doing it correctly for you. You still need to ensure that it's correct yourself. In-text citations help with locating the cited source in the reference section of the paper. So the in-text citations, those little brackets, sort of like you see below here where it says Atkins 2018, this is sort of like, think about like a legend for a map, and it tells you what the symbols represent. So within a paragraph, and you see these brackets with the author's name and the year of publication, it should be really easy for me to find this in the reference list because I'm looking at the beginning of the list because it's A and it should be in alphabetical order. So I should easily be able to find the title of the article that Atkins wrote, right, by looking on the reference page. So if my reference page doesn't include Atkins, then I'm in trouble, right? If you include brackets in your paragraph, you must provide source details on your reference page, and vice versa. If you're listing sources on your reference page but not talking about them in your parentheses, then something's wrong, okay? So parenthetical citation, or the brackets, this should include the author's last name and the year of publication. Don't put the author's first name or full name, only last name and only the year of publication. You don't need to say that it was April 26th, 2018. No, just the year is good. Oops, there we go. Narrative citation. This is the other way you can do it if you prefer. So Atkins, 2018, suggests that, etc. Either way works. Now notice where the punctuation is here. If you put the parentheses at the end of your sentence, make sure your punctuation comes after it because your cited source needs to be listed within the sentence that it's talking about. Okay, here, same principle. You can have your author's last name and then the year of publication, then the fact or the piece of information, and then punctuation at the end of your sentence. So if you go on to start talking about other sources, just make sure that you are being specific and that whatever fact you're giving credit to that source within the same sentence. So pay attention to where your punctuation is. If the source that you're using includes page numbers, you can add that information to your in-text citation. So just imagine if you were to find a piece of information in a book that had 600 pages, it would be really cruel to expect your reader to locate that fact by reading through the book themselves. So just help them out a little bit and give them the page number. You do that with a lowercase p and a period and then the page number. So that's what it would look like. Don't stress if it isn't that format, that's okay. For example, if you're using an online newspaper article, those typically aren't several pages long and they're sort of just organized by paragraph. So if it's a newspaper article, don't worry about page numbers. When you are using quotes, we have a couple of options of how we can do that. So introducing the quotation with a signal phrase. So it's important that you are introducing a quote instead of it looking like you're just copying and pasting a bunch of sentences that other people wrote instead of writing something yourself. You do not need to use a full sentence as a quotation. You can take the beginning of a sentence or the end of a sentence and then add to it and make it fit into the grammar of the phrase that you are writing yourself. So here's what that looks like. I could write, as scientific knowledge advances, comma, and then copy this phrase in here. That works. All right. If you're doing it a bit differently, if you decide that you want to use the author's last name in the sentence, let's say, for example, it's a prominent researcher in that field, and you want a name drop, then put the name in the sentence and say, Hong stated that, and then give the fact. At the end of the sentence, that's where you would put the page number. All right. Moving along. A longer chunk of text, you're not going to copy something, I would say no more than 1.5 lines of text. Okay, so even this sort of quotation, I would say is too long. You could cut that a bit shorter or paraphrase it. So here's an example. This sentence here, you're paraphrasing. So if I were to go to the original source, I would not find this sentence exactly, but I would find those ideas. All right, so parenthetical citation, we have author's last name, comma, ampersand, last name, comma, year of publication. Or we could do it this way. Either way, it's still paraphrased. And notice how there are no quotation marks here. If you do not include quotation marks, then the reader will assume that these are your words. If you copy exact phrases from the source, you must put quotation marks around them. Otherwise, it's considered plagiarism. All right? So that's just sort of an understanding that people have when using APA format. No quotation marks means you wrote it yourself. And that better be the case, otherwise we're in trouble. Okay. Introducing quotations with signal phrases. Here are a couple of options because a lot of students are uncomfortable doing this the first time. So what kind of words can I use to introduce these phrases? According to last name, year, give your quote, page number, period. Use this as a template for how you can organize your ideas. Some other words, instead of just according to or argued that, we've got some options here. Acknowledged, contended, maintained, responded, reported, argued, concluded, etc. Okay? And because anything that you're quoting is older and finished, it's in the past, all of these signal phrases should be used in the past tense or present perfect tense. For you non-grammar geeks out there, then what that means is argued that, this is simple past tense, argued, present perfect, Reynolds has argued. Okay, either one of those would work. If you have a fact or a piece of information that comes from several different places, then you might want to give credit to both of them. So here's an example. Adams and Collins both said the same thing. So we're going to give both of them credit and put both authors' names and years of publication within the same brackets, but separate them with a semicolon. Here, if you are using the narrative citation by listing the author's names in the sentence, then you're going to separate them with the word and. If you're using the parenthetical citation in the brackets, then you're going to use this ampersand symbol right here. If you have 3 or more authors, that gets exhausting. You're not going to write all of those authors' names out. So how that should look is et al. Okay, this just means and all the rest of them. So Lynn et al. If I were to look on the reference page, then I would look under L for Lynn, and then I would find the other authors' names written out. Okay, so you don't have to put them all in your paragraphs or in your citations, but on your reference page, you do need to list all of those author names. Sometimes what happens is you find a piece of information or a text and you don't know who the author was. This is really common if you're taking information from Statistics Canada or a government organization that publishes data that were information that was collected by teams of people. So you can't attribute it to one particular author. If that's the case, then instead what you're going to do is use the source's full title in the narrative citation. So according to Here's How Gardening Benefits Your Health, 2018. If you were to put it in parentheses, just take the first word from the title, here's, put that in quotation marks like that, and then the year of publication. For the most part, though, you should have an author's name. It would be very strange to not find an author's name unless it was, again, a government database article published by a group of people and can't be attributed to one particular person. Okay, so when you see anonymous blogs, for example, those should not be used in APA formatted papers because they're not credible sources. So if you are using the title of a text instead of the author's name, whether it's a journal article or a chapter in a book, you would use quotation marks like that. If it is a title of a book or a report, then you're going to italicize the name instead. Okay, so if this, Here's How Gardening Benefits Your Health, if that were a book, then I wouldn't be using it in quotation marks like that. I would be writing it in italics instead. A group author. Here we go. I was kind of mentioning this earlier about Statistics Canada. If you can, credit Stats Canada by listing it like that. Okay, you can state the name of it. You could put it in the parentheses like this. These are the options whether you're using narrative or parenthetical citations. All right, sometimes several authors will have the same last name, much like students in our classes often have the same last name too. So how do you differentiate between them? If, for example, you had 2 authors and the last name was Davis, then you would need to clarify by including the initial of their first name. So for example, Betty Davis and I don't know, Y Davis. And then that way I can still see the difference from the reference list as well. Oh, I need to just go back. Okay, let's say, for example, you have one author who published multiple things in the same year. Really hardworking person, right? This happens with very prolific authors. It doesn't happen too often, but let's say, for example, Chen published 3 different articles in 2018. You're just going to label them A, B, or C. And then in your reference list as well, then it would be specified to match A, B, or C in your reference list. All right. APA keeps changing every few years. Now we're on the 7th edition. So why do we keep getting these new editions? Well, it's because media changes and then there are different types of formats. So we needed to include, let's say, for example, there's an email or a personal letter that was written that you want to reference in an APA formatted paper. This is what it would look like. In a narrative citation, you're giving the name of the person and stating that it's a personal communication. That's what it would look like. Or if it's a parenthetical citation, then you have author's last name, the type, personal communication, and then the date. In your reference list, though, you don't need to include that it was a personal communication. It's just sort of understood. All right. If your text does not have page numbers, then you might have headings or section names instead, and then that would be an option that you can use. So instead of saying, page 5, you can say health benefits of kale section. That works. Or if it requires abbreviation, you can list an abbreviated heading or section name in quotation marks if it's too long. So for example, if the section title is "A cup of kale can help your body out in a number of ways," then just call it health benefits. Give it a shorter name. You can list the paragraph number. That's an option, especially for something like a newspaper article. I was mentioning earlier, you won't have several pages, but you could put a paragraph number instead. Or you could list the heading and the paragraph number. As long as it's possible for the reader to locate the original source. That's the whole purpose of this anyway. Okay. There are so many what ifs. What about? What if the author doesn't have this? What if the text doesn't have that? And that's why there are so many details and why this presentation is so long. All right. I'm not going to read through all of this, but just know that if you are having those sorts of problems, like text with no page number, the explanation does exist. You'll just have to do a bit of scrolling. Okay. Headings. You do not need to worry about headings in this class because you're not writing anything long enough to need headings. This is more for big research papers that have several sections, and that's not what we're doing. But for future reference, this is the page that you would need to know how to format everything. So a 5-level heading system, this is what it would look like. But we'll just move past that. Okay, if you were to include a table in your essay, and you won't need to for this semester, but this is what it would look like. Table 1, you give the title of it, and then you give a bit of information as well. So cite a source in a note below the table so that the reader knows when and where it's from. Also, for the figures, graphs, charts, that sort of thing, this is how we would format it. And additional resources. So again, this is the website where this PowerPoint comes from. This is the standard go-to source for most post-secondary institutions in North America. Actually, when I was a university student, I used this one to learn about APA. Yeah. So we've got 2 websites to use, and yes, there is a book available, but I'm not going to ask you to buy it. Okay, but that's it for now, and please refer back to this video, or you can scroll through the PowerPoint yourself. It's up on Moodle, and be sure to check out those documents as well so you can see sample templates of cover pages and reference pages. Bye for now.